Yeah, well, I'm going to start by saying hello to everyone. um, Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Thursday morning. Phoenix Sister Cities welcomes you, and so does the Business Relations Committee. I'm going to do two quick introductions that I think are extremely important because without the support um, of these folks, there's no way we could conduct projects or events like this. I'm going to start with uh, our president and CEO, Rita Marco. Rita, would you introduce yourself? There's a few folks that probably don't know who you are, and I think it's important people know who you are.
Thank you. So, Rita Marco, President and CEO of Phoenix Sister Cities. And I want to thank Rodrick for being with us this morning. And Emilio, I want to thank you for recruiting him and making this all possible.
Thank you. Um, okay, and now Rachel will be kind of our coordinator, sort of a master of ceremonies, master of the video process and the taking the answers and taking the questions and making sure that people get a chance to ask a question and our guest responds. Um, Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Well, hello, everyone. I'm sure you all have seen my name popping up with all of these emails going out, but I'm Rachel Benoit. I'm the Business Relations Coordinator for Phoenix Sister Cities, and a massive thank you yet again to both Emilio and Rodrick. We really appreciate both of you guys. And yes, so thank you. But yes, as we go forward, when we get to the Q&A section, if you all want to just put your questions in the chat, I will actually moderate them for you, but we will get there a little bit later this morning. With that said, I'm also going to go ahead and begin recording the meeting as of now, just to let everyone know.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Okay. As most of you know, Phoenix Sister Cities is an organization that helps promote peace and, in our case, with the Business Relations Committee, trade and business. We have 11 sister cities. I encourage you to look at our website. We'll have some commercial breaks, probably once or twice through the call today, where Rachel will direct you to a link if you want to either become a member or just learn more about Phoenix Sister Cities. So we're really looking forward to having you be more engaged. With the current situation today, our committee, who has addressed several different issues over the years, thought that it would be really important to have someone that is an expert, but most of all, someone that's been in different markets and dealt with different challenges to share with us how he did it, how he adjusted to different economies, to different situations worldwide or within our nation as we move forward economically. And uh, I thought of a good friend who actually, when I met him, he was here in Phoenix and he was part of the transition of the Phoenix area way back when. I'm not going to say what year, but I was just very impressed with him. We did a couple of trade missions to Mexico, and I've just loved working with him. So with that, he's been in, and hopefully you've seen his resume or looked him up. I encourage you to do that. He's been in several different markets. The ones I'll mention, and I'm sure he'll mention them, are Detroit, when it was one of the toughest markets in the country. He was in Puerto Rico when it was one of the most difficult markets in the country. Even though a territory, it's still the United States, and he was able to handle that and have success. And now, currently, he has turned Miami-Dade into a powerhouse in our nation. So I'm looking forward to hearing him. And with that, I'd like to introduce everyone to Rodrick Miller from Miami-Dade Beacon Council.
Thank you, Emilio. I really appreciate it. I should have you with me all the time to gas it up. This is going to be a good conversation today. I've got a presentation to kind of guide our discussion, but I really do encourage, if there's something that, I'm talking and there's something that you really want to get in, feel free to, put comments in or whatever. And I'm going to intersperse the conversation with kind of anecdotes of some of the things that I've seen in different markets that I've been in across the country and around the globe. So I'm really excited, to be talking to Phoenix sister cities. I really cut my teeth in economic development in the Phoenix market. When I first moved there, I was in the city of Glendale, and then I was with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council for 5 years after that. So Phoenix has a very special place in my heart, and so glad to be with all of you. Navigating the crossroad, building economies in times of uncertainty. I've been fortunate that I've been able to work in a lot of different markets and at some pretty challenging times. And there definitely is a sense that right now, whether it's challenging times or not, it's definitely a time of uncertainty. And the question, so what does that look like for us moving forward from here? I'll start by, just sharing a little bit about the organization I'm with. I am the CEO of the Miami-Dade Beacon Council. Next slide. The Miami-Dade Beacon Council is the economic development entity responsible for driving the growth of Miami-Dade County. We've been around about 40 years. I've been the CEO for about 2 years. And, we think about our work as driving a more sustainable, inclusive, and competitive economy for Greater Miami, not just growing the economy, but growing it in a very healthy fashion. What does that look like? To grow the economy, to be a champion for the community, investing in people, because we know that talent's the most important factor in driving economic growth. And then how do we actually think about shaping the future? Economic growth requires intentionality in terms of if you're going to get somewhere. And then what gets measured gets done. So we try to track and measure how we do that. Next slide. A little bit about me. I've been, as I mentioned, I've been doing this work for over 20 years. Have helped bring more than $6 billion in private investment and 50,000 jobs to, across 10 countries, and have worked in the U.S. I've done work in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as Europe and Latin America. I have a grad degree in policy from the Harvard Kennedy School, a master's in finance from El Tec de Monterrey in Mexico, and studied international business in undergrad. So just a little bit of grounding in terms of just the perspective that I'm bringing to this conversation. Next slide. And again, so our organization, the Beacon Council, over our 40-year history, we've brought about 120,000 jobs to Miami. It's supported more than 1,300 companies, and at this point, more than $8 billion in capital investments that we've helped bring to the Miami market since 1985. And since we're going to be talking about kind of economic uncertainty, I did think it was important to share a little bit of the economy that I'm currently in and what some of the highlights of that market are, just to provide a little bit of perspective. Next slide. As you think about so the South Florida is I believe the 14th or 15th largest economy in the world, with a $1 trillion GDP and over 20 million in population. Greater Miami is about 2.6 million people, but we consider ourselves the tip of the spear. We're about 155 billion GDP, but we make up part of the South Florida contingency, which is Miami, Dade, Broward, where Fort Lauderdale is, and of course Palm Beach. And when you look at those economies, and you look at almost 400 billion in private investment, we would be like the 33rd, 34th largest economy in the world if South Florida were its own country. I say that to say this idea that, of concentration of people, concentration of assets should breed a higher level of productivity, profitability, and opportunity for markets if those assets can be leveraged and positioned in the right way. Next slide. What else can we say about the Miami markets? It's really driven largely by these assets. Our port, our international airport, that has over 179 nonstop flights daily. Number 1 for international freight, number 2 for international passengers, number 3 for total freight. And then, of course, we got Port Miami. And so these assets, these assets are really the core of what drives that when you look at our universities and our connectivity assets. Next slide. And so, Miami is not a market that historically had been thought of as a high performing market, but in the last, 5-10 years, it's really emerged. We were named the number 1 market for FDI by the Financial Times, Nikkei, the number 1 region in North America for investment, the number 1 city to do business in Latin America, the 2nd largest international finance hub on the East Coast. And a lot of that's, because of our international connections. When you take a a peninsula and you stick it in the middle Caribbean, you end up getting international connections. We've got actually says 72 consulates at this point, so over 80 consulates that are in Miami. So we're a global community, and that's really the core of what makes our market move forward. Next slide. Universities, the number one driver of investment decisions by companies is talent, access to talent. And so everything that we do, really a lot of what we do centers around how do we actually optimize that talent and really get it to grow. And so when you look at, the number 4 public university in the US, with Florida International University, University of Miami is kind of the flagship in the region. Florida International has about 50,000 students. And then we've got University of Miami. We've got Miami-Dade College, which is the largest college in the country with a community college in the country with 125,000 students. And I say all of that to say this, whereas kind of the traditional education and talent model has really been revolved around kind of how many people you could keep out of access to education and growth by being exclusive. Miami's been able to grow an economy by really focusing on how do you use these institutions as ladders of economic mobility for different populations. Miami has 54% of our population is born outside the United States. And so we have a very different makeup in terms of what our workforce looks like. And it also has different pools in terms of what it means that we need from our universities in terms of performance. Next slide. When we talk about a market of growth, so our aviation sector is growing at 6 times the national average. Our creative industries, life sciences, technology, and trade and logistics have grown at about 2 times the national rate. And so we are a high growth market where we're seeing lots of investment and lots of opportunities. And I think that's going to continue to happen. And we'll talk a little bit in a minute about how we were able to do some of those things, but what those assets, what those opportunities mean in today's context. Next slide. And so our finance sector is growing 3 times faster than the national finance sector, and it's grown 3 times faster than the overall local economy over the last 10 years. We had $6 billion in investments in Miami startups in 2022, and those numbers continue to go up. The 2023 numbers recently came out, and they're even higher. I think we're at number 4 now in the U.S. for total VC funding. So we're really trying to build an economy that's comprehensively competitive and can move forward. Next slide. And of course, we've had tremendous tech sector growth, 81% growth over the last 10 years, and 3 times its growth since just 2020. The pandemic, as challenging and as awful as it was, it did present an opportunity for Florida to really do a hard pivot in terms of, because it didn't close down. We had a lot of people that moved here from New York, from Chicago, from San Francisco, from LA, and found out it's not just a place that has pretty beaches, but it's also a place where you can do business. And we're continuing to increase in our rankings as it relates to our startup ecosystem and our ability to be able to perform. So this is just setting a little bit of the table. So Rod Miller, 20 years in economic development, CEO of the Beacon Council, the economic development entity responsible for driving the economy in Miami. And Miami is a high growth economy with lots of opportunities, but it's also a very young economy. I often tell the story of how my now 18-year-old son, around 16, he challenged me to a foot race. And we were on the beach and it was Christmas. And one of my friends, his wife said, Rod, he may beat you today. Of course, I thought that there was no chance that my progeny would be able to beat me in a foot race. And needless to say, he won. About halfway through the race, I stopped running because I saw the gap that was happening and I did not want that to be recorded. And after that happened, I called my sister, my younger sister, and I said, hey, sis, Jordan and I, we were racing today and you're not going to believe who won. And she said to me, well, I hope he won. And I said, why would you say such a thing? And she said, because you're a middle-aged man. And at the time, he was a 16-year-old kid. So she said, you're a middle-aged man. There's no reason that a 16-year-old kid shouldn't beat you in a race. And I said, oh, you're crazy. So I called my dad and I said, Dad, I was racing with Jordan today. And I didn't get more than that out. He said, what were you doing racing with a 16-year-old kid? He said, you're lucky you're not hurt. And when we think about this in terms of economic terms, When we look at markets like Miami and we look at markets like Phoenix, you're talking about relatively young markets. And so where you've got markets like New York, Chicago, other markets that have been around for 300, 400, 500 years in terms of their economic underpinnings, in terms of how they do business, who's got access to the decision makers, their ecosystem. When you think about those sorts of things, those markets are well established. They're very sophisticated, and they've got old money, old assets, et cetera, that allow them to really, be able to perform. And you look at markets like Phoenix or like Miami, these are younger markets, which means that we're more agile, we're more open, we've got opportunities to do things and actually determine kind of how we want to compete in the global economy, not kind of be relegated to where we've been. Flip side of that scenario is that these other markets, because they've been around longer and because they've got these things well established, in many cases, they just have more experience or more sophistication around certain sectors. So the question is, how do we take advantage of the agility that we've got as younger markets and more dynamic markets to be able to compete on the global economy, and especially in today's times? Next slide. So when I think about economic development, I love the work that we do. It's improving the well-being of a community through efforts that entail job creation, job retention, tax-based enhancements, and quality of life. In other words, how do you bring more jobs and more capital investment, ideally better quality jobs and better private investment, more catalytic investment to the market? That's really what our work is about. Next slide. And as we think about that work, at the core of it, we want to build an economy that works. We want to build an economy that's healthy. How do we define healthy? Well, I think about healthy in terms of being sustainable, inclusive, and competitive. Sustainable in terms of the business practices that an economy has, or that a market has, in terms of the way that it does business should be have a high level of predictability. The way that the market works should have a high level of predictability so that companies know what they can expect. The way that the market works should have a high level of connectivity so that it's efficient in terms of how it works. And sustainable also, you can't just think about sustainability in terms of how the market operates, but also thinking about sustainability in terms of the built environment. We know that there are more and more of these events, of these climate events, and this is not a political statement, it's just a factual one. There are more and more of these events, whether they're fires, whether they're hurricanes, whether they're earthquakes. And so we as, economic developers or as leaders in our communities have a responsibility to figure out how do we leverage that challenge, right, as an opportunity in terms of how do you address the sustainability and climate issues that your market is facing in a way that allows for you to be around for the next 100, 200, 300 years and be better. And also, how do you think about taking those challenges and converting them into economic opportunity? Because we believe that those aren't only the biggest challenges of our time. It's not only an existential challenge, it's an incredible opportunity. If we can solve these challenges in our markets, we can export that know-how to other parts of the world. We want to build an economy that's inclusive, that whether someone lives in Buckeye, whether they live in Chandler, or whether they live in Peoria, they can fully participate in the economy, whether they're a veteran, whether they're a man, whether they're a woman, whether they are Black, white, Hispanic, Latino, whatever. And the reason why that's so important is because everyone that's not participating in the economy at an optimal level, and that's an important detail, at an optimal level represents a loss in productivity and profitability to the economy. I can make an argument that's a social argument, but it's not a social argument. It's an economic argument that everyone that isn't participating in an optimal level, either as an investor, as an employee, or as an entrepreneur, represents a loss to the economy. So how do you make an economy that has more higher levels of participation and better quality participation where resources are optimized? And then ultimately, it is a competition. It's not just about doing more transactions in terms of bringing more companies and more jobs, but it's about how do you create an environment that shows that $1 invested in your market yields more than $1 invested elsewhere, because it's just a better place to do business because of the policies, the infrastructure, the ecosystem that you've been able to establish as a market. Next slide. And so when we think about that competitiveness, let's do a double click on that. We think about competitiveness as the mix of factors that impact the attractiveness of a market as a place for investment, corporate growth, and quality of life. What are you talking about, Rod? Well, competitiveness is really at its core. Why would a company move to Phoenix? What is it that's special about Phoenix? Why would a person move to Phoenix? how do you push on those factors to make it like that they've got to be there, that the value, that the ROI for that decision on every level, whether it's quality of life, whether it's profitability for the companies, makes sense. Next slide. And so this framework to think about competitiveness, this is kind of at the biggest, kind of at the macro level. While we think about it, if you think about this reverse pyramid, let's start at the bottom. The endowments that a community has are kind of those things that you can't do anything about. That those are the things that kind of make you at your core who you are. For a market like Phoenix, that would be the fact that you're in the desert. There's nothing that's going to change Phoenix being in the desert. That's a core asset, a core piece of the endowment. It's a population that's diverse. That's a core endowment. That's a core piece of what makes Phoenix what it is. Thinking about the endowments of a market, I often say, I'm 6'5", good looking, dipped in chocolate. I can't do anything about it. That's just, those are my endowments. And when you're thinking about how to build your market, those endowments are the foundation of what you're building from. And so, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but you've got to start with those endowments as the opportunity to position yourself in the global economy. So when you go to market, so for example, when I was in New Orleans, one of the things that I saw very quickly was that there was a high level of creativity, a high level of artistry, whether it was in the food, whether it was in other things. And so part of what I realized that part of that endowment for New Orleans was the creativity of that market. And the conversation quickly became with companies, well, if you like the creativity that you see in our food and that you see in our music and that you see in our artwork, imagine that with certain capacities around technology, around certain things, because that translations of that creativity also can translate into innovation with the right things wrapped around it. When I led the work in Detroit, it was around Detroit knew how to make things. So whether it was cars or Shinola watches, how do we build on that endowment that you had a labor force that was skilled in the area of manufacturing? And so thinking about those endowments as the foundation is vital. Macroeconomic competitiveness. These are the things that, quite frankly, we can't do a whole lot about. Much of this happens at the federal level, sometimes at the state level, but you can lobby, but really you're limited. The microeconomic competitiveness is the place where we can tend to have much more influence. And that's the level where local economic development ecosystems can play in terms of how do you push on different factors of real estate and other things. As a matter of fact, let's go a level deeper with the next slide. So when you're looking at the factors that drive that a company is considering when they're thinking about where they move, how they move, and what's going to get them there, there are a few things that really jump out here. One is this idea of, government and fiscal policy. So if I make money, am I going to be able to keep it? I want to keep as much money as I make. I want you to make it easy for me to do business in your market. Those are things that are core. Security is the place a safe place for my product, for my goods, for me. Infrastructure, can I get things in and out? What's the quality of what's the cost of electricity? What's the transportation infrastructure like? How affordable is the market? These are really big questions that have to be answered in a thoughtful way in order to be able to move a market forward. And I would tell you, human capital is the most important factor. The conversation most of the time starts and ends there. Can I get people that are healthy, that have the skill set, that want to work and know how to work? And we're going to double click on some of this stuff in just a moment. Technology. What's the access to technology? What are the sources to start businesses from a business incubation? Openness. What are your connections to global market? How much of your population is foreign born? How many flights do you have going outwards? How much FDI do you have? What are those trade relationships like? And then environmental policy. These are the things that companies look at. And most of the time, there's different weights on these depending on the sector, but you've got to really focus on that to move the economy forward. Next slide. So this is the theory of change. Building the economy that you want requires intentionality. So economies aren't built by accident. So if you want a strong economy that's making things happen, you have to be intentional about saying this is the economy that I want. Most of the time when I go to markets, I'll talk to business leaders and everybody say, oh yeah, the economy is moving up. This is moving up. It's a great time to be here. That means absolutely zero, because up can be up, 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 up. Thinking about what that economy looks like in terms of the mix of sectors, the caliber of jobs, how do you close the gap between the have and the have-nots? How do you optimize the usage of your endowment, of your assets, of your space? And then recognition that no one person or entity can build an economy, not a single mayor, not a single economic development organization, not a single company. It takes risk to be allocated and responsibility to be allocated to the places where it can best manage it. The best place to build an economy is from current positioning. So oftentimes people will get excited about a sector, about something, and say, we're going to go do that. Well, do you have the positioning to actually move into that space effectively? The best place to start is with what you got. And then every economy will go through periods of growth and decline. So I think about it as, if you've never been hit in the jaw, it really, really hurts. And unfortunately, if you haven't been hit in the jaw as an economy, it will happen at some point. And so how do you actually position yourself to best manage that? Next slide. And so when I think about the role of economic developers in this thing, how do you balance short-term tactical execution with building and strengthening foundational underpinnings? In other words, you got to do deals today while setting up the market so that it's in a better place to do deals moving forward, right? Making sure that the permitting processes are fixed, that the real estate's got good, that you know what you've got there, and you've got partnerships in place to accelerate growth. No one individual can drive an economy. Economic developers don't really create jobs, that's what we say we do. We are actually kind of experts in pulling people together. We try to figure out how to influence policymakers, how to influence municipal officials and government state officials, how to influence companies. And you got to realize that economic growth and economic development is not a values-free proposition. Economic developers are consistently weighing, the question of market growth versus a variety of other factors. And that is where the art and where the judgment comes in. But it's an important art and it's an important judgment. Next slide. So now we're getting to the good stuff, and I think I've got about 10 minutes or so. And so so the good stuff. We'll start with this. We're in a time, I think, of unprecedented instability, and and I don't want to overstate that, but I firmly believe it. When you look at the last 20 years, 25 years have been incredible, because we had 3 black swan incidents, between the 2001 9/11, being one, the 2008 recession, of course, and then the pandemic. All of these things were things that dramatically shifted the position of our world's economy. And I think we're in another one of those moments right now that there may be an economic shift coming to bear. And so Rod, what are you talking about when you say this idea of a new world order? Well, one of the things that I think is important to mention is, of course, we've got unprecedented geopolitical insecurity. We've always had it, but I think right now it is a bit of a powder keg. When you look at what's happening in the Middle East, you look at what's happening in Ukraine, and these are not insignificant markets in terms of oil, in terms of supply chain. Ukraine is also very rich in a lot of minerals. And so when you look at these critical minerals and what they mean for manufacturing of chips and other things, we are in a place where this geopolitical instability and insecurity is not only going to have potential ramifications in terms of migration trends, but also supply chains and in terms of decision making. When you think about this new world order, we've got a shifting trade environment where the heat is being turned up at a very rapid pace as it relates to tariffs. There's increasing protectionism, not just in the US, but abroad. And then we've got, of course, the non-tariff barriers such as quotas, licensing requirements, import bans, subsidies. All of these things are really shifting the nature of what trade looks like. And I think what we're seeing now is a I don't know, bifurcation might not quite be the right word, but we're seeing a stratification where I think that we're probably going to end up with 3 or 4 big influences driving the global economy. I think we already know that China, has been able to purchase, invest in assets throughout Africa and Latin America, which has given it a real kind of strong foothold in these markets. That represents a threat not only to U.S. Economic hegemony, but also to our security interests, right? So we know that that's happening. So China is well established. We've got the European Union, which has historically been one of the strong players in the global economy, is still where one of the major drivers of FDI globally. But the EU is also going through changes as its population gets older, and you're seeing increasing xenophobia in that market and some other things that are causing challenges. Of course, you've got Russia, which has aspirations to be the USSR again. And then, of course, you've got the United States, which has had a shifting posture, I would say, in the new administration amongst our old friends. Old friends are saying, are you still our friends? And I think this creates a unique space for how decisions are made in investment flows. From a governmental restructuring perspective, at the federal level, we're seeing the elimination of governmental safeties, right? Whether these are programs around, the elimination and the kind of the deterioration and kind of the scaling back of government programs. And so that's creating a certain sense of uncertainty. And I think we're going to continue to see different decisions around investments as a byproduct of it in terms of people's confidence in the market. We're seeing the privatization of some elimination, some deterioration. We're also seeing the privatization of some public services. I think the traditional roles of certain institutions at the federal level is now in question, as well as some of the things in terms of checks and balances. And the shrinking federal government not only has ramifications for those individuals, but also for the services at the national level, as well as kind of the role of government in everyday society. That is a monumental shift that's going to impact how everyone lives. Financial instability. Of course, when we think about it from the perspective of the Federal Reserve, they got two goals: to try and keep inflation to below 2% and full employment in the economy. And when we look at the inflation being less than 2%, they have not achieved that goal in a very, very long time. So we've got, I won't say it's runaway inflation, but we've got some significant inflation risk. And we know that with these increase in tariffs, that goods are going to become more expensive. And I think we're going to see more inflation. So get ready for that ride. Not only are we seeing that in terms of financial stability, of course, there's issues related to housing affordability across the country. We see the crypto and these other currencies now beginning to hit critical mass in the market. And then we also see, and I think we're going to see questions related to capital accessibility as kind of the economy goes through its ebbs and flows. So we're in a very interesting position. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the changing nature of work. So from a changing nature of work perspective, you've got, we meet with about 330 companies a year here in Miami, local companies, to see if they're growing, shrinking, how we can support them. And what is interesting, to all of them talk about the same thing in terms of the workforce. They're all looking for that unicorn employee that's broader, that's deeper, and they can't get enough of them. So human capital is the fuel that drives economic growth. And I think what we're seeing now is, remote work has changed kind of the dynamics between employer and employee. Now, with 5 generations in the workplace, employers are having to figure out how to navigate that. And then with the increased AI and automation, where do we go in terms of that and productivity expectation? And then the last big thing shaping today's economy that I'll hit on is climate risk. And I've already mentioned it, but we're seeing more climate activities in terms of earthquakes, hurricanes, fires, et cetera, and they're increasingly more severe. And these are factors that are also going to influence where companies decide that they want to invest. Now, what I often say, because people ask me about that hurricanes in Miami, I often say, yeah, what we see is that things are happening everywhere, but our economy hasn't buried our head in the sand. We've been proactive in figuring out. We had the largest resiliency office in the country at one point, with about 30 people working on resilience and infrastructure, because we know that we had to address those questions and we had to build for the realities of our environment. And that's going to be important. Not only are we seeing greater physical damage from these things, we're also seeing increased insurance claims and lots of instability in the insurance market. all of those things point to, next slide, why we have to really respond in a way that's cohesive and that's thoughtful. So the first thing is we got to build a resilient ecosystem. How do you build a resilient ecosystem? Well, you got to know that talent is everything. So investing in people in ways that's sustainable, that's thoughtful, that allows them to be able to move into the jobs that your market anticipates having. That's critical to building a resilient ecosystem. What else is critical? You got to prepare. That expectation that at some point you'll get hit in the job is because it's going to happen. So what are the risks that you foresee in your market, and how do you plan for those risks before they happen? And how do you and planning for those risks before they happen? So, for example, right now, well, I'll get to this in a minute. And how do you build the ecosystem you need for the market you want? And that ecosystem mapping of how do companies navigate your local environment? Where do they go for help? What's the quality of service support? How are they able to plug in strategically and thoughtfully? Building a resilient ecosystem also requires, focusing on institutions. Institutions matter. So what are the institutions that have the credibility in your market, and how do you deepen that credibility, ensure that rule of law is strong, and that there is some level of accountability? And then the last thing from a building resilient ecosystem is infrastructure modernization. And so to build a resilient ecosystem, you got to prepare. You got to know that talent is front of mind. You got to build the ecosystem you need for the market you want. So this intentional effort around ecosystem mapping and developing the institutions and the supports to make sure that companies have a turnkey and people have a turnkey experience. And then you got to have world-class infrastructure. Those are kind of core things you need to do to build a resilient ecosystem. You got to reposition the market for international business in today's terms. So with the things that are going on that we talked about, you really got it, and I know we're almost at time. I'll go about 3-4 more minutes and we'll wrap it up. But we've got to lean in on global relationships. So people that were foreign born, companies that are international companies that are already in your market, break down their supply chains and figure out what else in their supply chain can you bring to your market. What's happening in terms of your connectivity assets? And when I say that, I'm talking about the airport, and I'm talking about your institutions of higher education. What are their global connections? And is at a time when the U.S. market is grappling with its position in the global economy, and there's questions about the U.S.'s commitment to globalization. This is the time when relationships between people and between communities really, really matter. The work of the Phoenix Sister Cities is doubly important at this time when those things are in question. So to reposition the market internationally, you need to lean in on your global relationships. You need to be intentional about market promotion. So right now, for example, we're doing the Select USA, conference where the federal government invites companies from abroad to the U.S. But we've also this year been to Brazil, we've been to Spain, we've been to other markets, making sure that we thoughtfully promote the opportunities in Miami and being very clear about what our value proposition is. And not only promoting Miami, saying this is a good place to do business, but with turnkey assets in terms of where can companies locate, what kind of partnerships can we help them kickstart right away, because that's the pre-work that allows for these deals to happen at a faster clip. You want to reposition the market. You also need to leverage federal tools and programs. So for example, our foreign trade zone program. So as we're seeing this pressure and increasing protectionism, what we've seen is a spike in companies that are saying, oh, we've got to get into the US market now because of these tariffs. We don't want those to apply to our things. So we want to take advantage of your foreign trade zone. We've done more foreign trade zone applications this year than we've ever done in our history because of all of these companies saying, oh, this risk is there. We need to get into the US now. And so how do you pivot and react to the realities of what the pressures that our market's causing on the global economy to be well positioned? And then we've got to develop alternative supply chains. This is part of that. Remember when we were talking about building a resilient ecosystem and preparing, we're looking already at what are the supply chains out of China, out of other places, and how do we actually pivot to make them something, else if we need to as this trade war heats up. How do you capture manufacturing? So part of this is, if you look at the decline of U.S. manufacturing, it's been a precipitous decline since the 1950s. I don't think we'll ever get to the place where we were in the 1950s again, nor do I think we want to. I want to wear Nikes. I don't really want to make them. I want to, use an iPhone. I don't know that I really want to make it. That said, there are opportunities in manufacturing that are high value. Phoenix has been very good, of course, in the semiconductor industry, some other sectors in terms of getting that high value manufacturing, med tech, and some other things. Focusing on high value manufacturing is going to be critical. I do think that, the proposition of bringing manufacturing back here in scale, I don't think we will like what has to happen in the economy in order for that to be a reality. Because for manufacturing to be attractive at scale in the US, the dollar has to be incredibly weakened, because it has to be cost sensitive. We have to be in a place where people can afford to make this stuff at a cost that's realistic, not only for Americans, but to export to the rest of the world. And so I think there's a real risk. I think there probably is some perception that the dollar is overvalued, but I don't know that I don't know that we want what would happen if we were to destabilize and weaken the dollar. And we can talk more about that in the Q&A, but I think that's a really important thing. The manufacturing opportunities do exist, and it's going to really be contingent on access to talent that knows how to do it, sites, access to raw materials, which is why the global security issues are so important. And then, of course, and I said a cheap dollar will actually drive manufacturing. Leveraging the AI opportunity. The AI opportunity is about this, a lot of people are worried about where AI is going, but it's about displacement. People are concerned about displacement. That's going to happen. Some of that's going to happen, but most of it's about augmentation. Realistically, if you're a professional in what you do, there's no way, there's a long road before AI is going to get better than you are. I think what it's really going to do is going to push people to be more productive and figure out what that looks like. And the markets that win are going to be the ones that invest heavily in people getting those skill sets, and having the capacity to leverage AI. And then the infrastructure support and having the infrastructure support for it. So, for example, we focused on green data centers because AI requires a lot of data and a lot of electricity. So we're focusing on things that are going to give us the capacity. And then last but not least, the mobile workforce and labor migration. So what we know is that more people are working remotely, and I think the pandemic showed people they can work from anywhere. So we're still seeing it's not at the levels of pre-pandemic. It's not at the levels that it was during the pandemic. People are still saying, you know what, I have options about where I live and how I live. And I think we're going to continue to see that. And we're seeing things such as affordability. A lot of the hot markets are really not as affordable as they used to be. So people are moving further and further out. I think that's going to have major implications for where companies invest and how they invest. Climate, of course, is pushing migration patterns. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention immigration patterns. And I think, or immigration policy. Immigration policy is going to be a major challenge. We do not have the workforce to provide for all the jobs that we currently have in the marketplace. And as we see this kind of mass exodus of immigrants, I think we're going to have a lot of other immigration pressures. So there's going to be a need to reskill labor forces. There's going to be a need to think about how do we develop and cultivate talent differently, and how do we leverage relationships with other markets that can augment our workforce capacity. Last slide. So as we go through questions, economic developers, and people that are doing this work now have a very different challenge. They have to serve as diplomats, as futurists, as builders, as storytellers. And the opportunity is not to simply respond to change, but to shape the change. And I think what you're going to see is that we're in a time where the opportunities to shape that change are probably unprecedented. Back on the AI thing, the internet, it took 10, 15 years before the internet really had the impacts that we start to see what it could really do. I think it's going to be 10 to 15 years before we really see the capacity of the AI, but it's picking up at a much faster clip. With that, I'll stop, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you so much for addressing our committee. Again, phoenixsistercities.org. Please visit when you get a moment before we jump into questions. I am going to turn it over to Rachel and Rita so that we can flow quickly. I have one question, but I'm going to hold until I see what the other folks are going to share. So go ahead, Rachel, please take over.
Yes, all right. So we have our first question by Anne Marie. So, foreign trade zones, how do we know administration will not change the rules or intervene with that progress? And Anne Marie also said great information, so thank you.
Thank you. We don't know. I mean, I think one of the things that we're seeing is that, the president has a mind of his own, and he does change from, within days, right? And I think that's one of the risks that makes this a more volatile market than it's been before, and why, if that point around building a resilient economy is really important, because we know that there's a higher level of instability than there's been just based on what we've seen in the first, 60, 90 days. That said, there's not a good case. I don't think they will change the foreign trade zone, because what it's doing is it's driving companies and it's driving manufacturing here that wouldn't have come here otherwise, because it's giving them an end to the U.S. market and the ability to be able to take advantage of those benefits in a way that and it's a higher value for them now because of the tariffs and external markets. So I think the foreign trade zone is a tool that really is in alignment with the president's goal of bringing manufacturing back and bringing investment back to the U.S.
Great, thank you.
I see a handful of people typing, so we'll give them just a moment.
No worries. And on any of these ideas, if you want me to go into case studies or things that have happened in other markets, I'm glad to do that as well.
Let's see. Uber, I see you have your hand raised. Did you want to put a question in the chat, or did you want to verbally? Okay. All right. We have a question from Emilio. Thank you. Out of all of the strategies shared, what is the number one thing you will do in Miami-Dade?
The number one thing that I'm focused on is people, is the talent development. So one of the things that we found is that we've got virtually full employment in Miami-Dade. We've got, I think last month it might have been 2.5% unemployment. And I've been here about 2 years. At one point it was, I think, 1.8, 1.7% unemployment. And we're in a fast growing market. The challenge that presents is that companies that want to expand and grow here are saying, Rod, we want to grow here, but you just don't have the people. You just don't have the workforce. And so we've really tried to say, well, what is it that we can provide that will actually answer that workforce question? So we're in the process of developing a program right now. We call it Talent Bridge. And it has three main components. The first one is we've got a portal that we're developing, and this portal is an industry portal because companies are being asked to do more than they've ever been asked to do in terms of training their people, in terms of providing for quality of life issues, et cetera. So this portal aims to provide companies with resources in terms of how to upskill, train their people, connect them to academic and other training partners, provide resources in terms of how to offset the cost of upskilling, provide data insights, curricula. So we'll be doing that. The other thing with the Talent Bridge Initiative, we're creating a test bed for companies to try out different things. So for example, the financial services sector said to us, we've got young people graduating that don't know about commercial banking. They all think they need to go to New York and be investment bankers. So we're going to do a one-day intensive on what commercial banking is for students that are in school. We're taking college students and high school kids, and we're doing site tours with them of companies so that they can get exposure to different careers they didn't know about before. And then we're also trying to figure out how do we tap into underperforming populations. So 68% of the people that have disabilities in Miami live in poverty. And so we're working intentionally on how do we actually give businesses the capacity to understand how to manage, how to train people that have these things. And we're working with, nonprofit organizations that specialize in this work. So so the number one thing is that we can get more people, not just in the marketplace, right, but at an optimal level. Because of our population, we've got a lot of people from Latin America and the Caribbean that are doctors and engineers, et cetera, in their home countries, and they haven't been able, the English has been an impediment, or they haven't wanted to go back to school. And so how do we leverage those populations and get them out? If we can address the talent issue, then we know that jobs will come.
Wonderful, thank you.
Oh, one other quick thing I guess I'll mention. We also have something called the Academic Leaders Council, which I run, which are the presidents of the University of Miami, Florida International University, Miami-Dade College, Florida Memorial, the superintendent of schools, and Barry University and St. Thomas University. And we've set a goal with those leaders to grow our population from 45% having at least a 2-year credential or some post-high school training to 65% 5% by 2040. And so we're working very closely with that ecosystem of universities to make sure that they're saying, hey, we understand what kind of jobs and what kind of talent you need, and we're going to get more people educated and more people able to do it. Any student that graduates from a high school in Miami-Dade College with a 2.0 GPA or higher can go to Miami-Dade College and get a 2-year degree for completely free. So those are the kinds of investments we're making in human capital to position us to win.
That is amazing. We have our next question from Harry. Domestically, with pressures placed on universities by withholding funds for research and development, how does that impact our overall economy? So, kind of a good segue right there.
It's gonna be devastating. I can't overstate it. It's going to be devastating because historically, if you look at the last 50, 60 years, the university research that's been funded by federal has really been the foundation of what's supported a lot of the private sector innovation. Now, that said, I do think that some of that will be captured in terms of, the biggest producers of IP, the Harvards, the MITs, these institutions. They do have enough that they can continue some of that research. I also think the private sector is going to step up in a different way. But I also think that this creates a tremendous vacuum, a sucking sound for other markets that want to be. Our university infrastructure is the envy of the rest of the world. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to see the rise of other markets being very aggressive in recruiting our top talent from outside of the United States, and those countries making those sorts of investments. I think it is a significant risk for us. And I think the only responses we can have right now is to figure out how do we find private sector partners that are willing to take on some of that work, and how do we kind of push even at the state level and other political bodies to make up for some of that investment. But there's nowhere near the capacity that the federal government has, nor anywhere near the ability to actually test bed the ideas that are coming out of university research.
Okay, the next question is from Claire. What strategies do you recommend for supporting local small business owners and entrepreneurs in these younger and growing markets, especially in these times of economic uncertainty?
Well, the first thing I would say is deep relationships. So when I got to Miami, we were doing about 150 to 200 business retention expansion visits per year. That was 2 years ago. We're doing about 350 now. So lots of FaceTime in front of them, and that's a lot of work. And it's not, one group probably can't do it by itself, but lots of FaceTime with these companies to understand what their needs are, what their pain points are, and listen to them. I mean, I think so many times people will come in, I'm from the government, or I'm an economic developer, or I'm a business leader, I know what you need. No, listen to what they say they need first before we take other stuff to them, and then figure out how do we actually thoughtfully respond to the needs that they have. That business retention expansion is probably more important now than it's ever been. And I would say, the biggest challenges you're going to hear are going to be infrastructure. They need infrastructure. They're going to need capital access. They're also, though, the thing that they're going to really need right now is that supply chains are going to be sideways for the foreseeable future. So if you can figure out how to help them come up with alternative supply chains for their goods and services, they need to do that right away, because their costs are going to go up. And I think a lot of small businesses are going to hurt.
Okay, the next and probably our last question is from Uber. You mentioned that the U.S. doesn't have the workforce to meet all of the jobs available, and that bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. may require weakening the dollar. Given the actions we have seen by the current administration, is bringing back to the U.S. manufacturing feasible, or what needs to happen to make it feasible?
Yes. So I will say two things. One is I think U.S. plays a significant role in high value manufacturing already, and I don't see that going anywhere. And I think the high value manufacturing stuff, I think we can continue to play a significant role at a global scale, and we're going to see that. And I think there are demands in terms of our own society that are going to allow us to continue to make some progress in that area, but it's not going to be the kind of progress we'd like to see. I think as it relates to the bigger question of manufacturing, when you look at China, and I was meeting with some of the leadership from leadership from there a few weeks ago, and one of the things they were saying, they said it's interesting to us that the US wants to be China. We want to be you. You want to be manufacturing like us. We want to be a knowledge economy like you. The reason why they were able to be a manufacturing economy because it was all about cost, driving costs down. That's been the fundamental manufacturing thing, to get cost as low as possible so that people could buy these goods and services. And so I think there are things that are happening in the economy right now that are likely to weaken the dollar. I do think that the tariffs are going to create price inflation. I do think the immigration situation, as we start to not be able to meet production demands from a workforce and labor perspective, those are going to create real strains that are likely to weaken the dollar. And as those things happen, yeah, we can bring manufacturing back, but that's still a 10, 15, 20-year proposition. It's not going to happen overnight because manufacturing, these are huge investments. There are multiple investments over time, and you got to have the infrastructure and stuff to support it. My concern is I believe that's going to be borne on the backs of the middle class because as these things start to go up, the middle class and the working class are going to be the people that are going to have the most challenge in terms of navigating it. So can it come back? It can come back, but it's a long-term value proposition, and I don't think that the juice is worth the squeeze.
Okay, let me take over for a second. Thank you so much, Rod, for this amazing presentation. We're at the hour. It's been enlightening. I think that all our folks here are impressed, and just thank you so much. I'd encourage everyone online to join Phoenix Sister Cities at phoenixsistercities.org. We'd love to have you as a member. Even you, Rod, you need to come back, even though you're out there.
I'd love to.
And I don't know, I'd like to ask Rita to close as Phoenix Sister Cities president and CEO. And I just want to thank everyone and thank you again, Rod. It was incredible. Thank you so much. Rita?
Absolutely. Thank you, Emilio. And again, thank you for organizing this. Rodrick, what a great presentation. I saw so many things that I think Phoenix is doing well, and I saw so many things that I think Phoenix could do better. And I agree with you about workforce and labor and investment. So thank you again so much for holding up a glass for us to compare ourselves to Miami. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day.
And we'd have a little bag with a gift for you, but you're not here. So
I'll come back. I'll come back. I'll come look for it when I'm there in Phoenix again. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for being on the call.